What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I try and help you guys keep on top of the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Just a quick note, guys, this is being filmed on Friday morning and is going up on Saturday evening. So if there are any major developments on Friday evening or during Saturday, they will be discussed in the next video. Okay, let's jump in. Well, Evergrande is the talk of the town this week. Every man and his dog seems to be discussing the debt-ridden developer in China at the moment. Global markets have been watching as Evergrande flirts with default, with some investors worried that any collapse could ripple through international capital markets and the financial system. Some even feared that Evergrande could be China's quote-unquote Lehman moment, referring of course to the Lehman Brothers collapse 2007-2008 in the US. On Wednesday, Evergrande's bond payment promise seemed to have calmed some investors, however, with international capital markets seeing some recovery after a week of concern. The speech of US Federal Reserve Chairperson Jerome Powell that day may have also helped. By Friday, many international investors seem to have put Evergrande and their concerns with the property developer in China behind them. However, Evergrande's situation remains precarious and its liquidity crisis continues. We still have no idea how much rot is below the woodboards, as it were, of their balance sheets. One story from Chinese financial publication, Taiwan Media, gives us an idea of just how messy things could get. The story looks at a bank, Shangjing, in Liaoning, northeastern China, which has lent through the purchase of bonds over 100 billion RMB, approximately 15.5 billion US dollars, to Evergrande. Well, that's too bad for the bank and not particularly good for the owners, who are probably not going to get that 15.5 billion US dollars back. So then who owns the bank? Well, it turns out the majority shareholder with almost or potentially over 50% shareholding in this bank is Evergrande itself. If Evergrande needs to sell assets to pay down its debt, which at the very least is probably around 300 billion US dollars, but could be as high as $500 billion, it means it will need to sell assets. But if it has assets like this bank, which owe it money that it is unlikely to get back, then the value of these assets is likely much lower than the balance sheet would suggest. To many, it seems that this Evergrande mess came out of nowhere, but for those of you who have been watching China Update for some time know that we've been following this story for well over a year now, and we knew that it was going to get to this point at some point in the future, and here we are. In fact, this is what I presented to you guys about a year ago on the 1st of October 2020. Take a look. Last week, we discussed the world's most indebted property developer. As we discussed last week, Evergrande has been unable to move forward with the listing plan, and it is alleged that the company was seeking assistance from provincial government officials. At the central government level, officials have been debating about how to deal with the situation. It's being reported in Chinese private media that the People's Republic of China cabinet discussed Evergrande this week, but have not been able to agree on whether the central government should intervene. In a research note published this week by Rhodium Group, the authors observed, quote, news of burgeoning debt problems at China's largest property developer, Evergrande, have become the #1 topic in China's financial markets. While we see the immediate problems at Evergrande as solvable, the news is significant because the company's woes have not emerged in a vacuum. Property sector financial risks are becoming more central to market discussions of overall credit risks in China. Even if Beijing can figure out how to alleviate the immediate pressure on Evergrande, the problems related to China's excessive debt and credit growth in recent years will not go away. Now, there seem to be a lot of people online at the moment that know exactly what is going to happen with Evergrande in China, even those with little or no China training. Well, good for them, because I've been following Evergrande for over a year, and the property market and debt markets in China for over 5 years, and I myself cannot say for sure exactly what is going to happen. All I know is that there are several paths that this could go down for the company and for the country, and it mostly depends on, one, what exactly the government decides to do, and two, how competently the government implements its decision. Over the last 3 episodes of China Update, we've been unpacking the decisions available to regulators in Beijing and the risks associated with each of these decisions. I'd recommend going back and watching this video from 2 weeks ago if you want to review some of those details again. The ball is now very much in the regulator's court, and all we can do is sit along for the ride. What is also worth pointing out at this point as well is as much discussion as there has been about Evergrande domestically and around the world, there has been one group that has said very little. The government. So far, Chinese officials have remained silent, and major state-run media, with the exception of a few Global Times articles, have scarcely mentioned the Evergrande story over the last few weeks. But the government is certainly not asleep on the job. The Wall Street Journal, which typically has good China-based sources, reports on Thursday, quote, "Local governments have been ordered to assemble groups of accountants and legal experts to examine the finances around Evergrande's operations in their respective regions, talk to local state-owned and private property developers to prepare to take over local real estate projects, and set up law enforcement teams to monitor anger and so-called mass incidents, a euphemism for protests," end quote. I thought it would also be useful at this point to look at a few quotes and analysis from well-respected China analysts. Despite the talk, China Evergrande will not become a Lehman Brothers moment. Chinese authorities have huge influence over creditors. Beijing will not bail out the company directly, but it will be keen to avoid a complete collapse, as these shockwaves could envelop banks, suppliers, retail investors, and even local authorities. The final solution will be another cocktail of proven tricks: rolling over debts, haircuts on assets, and emergency payments to the most vulnerable. So expect the fate of China Evergrande to be a slow burnout rather than a quick meltdown. End quote. End quote. The advantage of the PRC system in dealing with messes such as Evergrande is that regulators have significant powers to persuade other companies to help out, and a robust stability maintenance system to ensure that creditors, employees, and apartment buyers will accept the best haircut on offer and not cause too much of a fuss. Yes, there have been small protests, but if things play out as they have in other similar cases, protests will be allowed for a bit, as people need to vent, and organizers will be warned if not arrested. Then the rest of the unhappy people will take what they are offered and like it with no recourse. Equity owners and foreign creditors don't really fit into that equation. They will likely get nothing. So we have a big mess with a lot of people losing money, but not one that is going to cause a systemic financial crisis inside the PRC. But as many analysts have been saying over the last few days, we should expect a bigger than expected slowdown in GDP growth. End quote. And finally, the analysis that is most in line with my own thinking on this question this week from Professor Michael Pettis of my alma mater, Peking University. He observed this week, quote, "I think policymakers in Beijing who understand that the system is unsustainable have been frustrated by their inability to address it in the past. This year certainly isn't the first year that regulators have tried to suppress debt, undermine moral hazard, clamp down on real estate prices, etc. But in the past, each time they did so, as the costs of doing so became apparent, they were forced to back down. Perhaps Evergrande is indeed a turning point, and the regulators will allow whatever damage is required to clear the system and transform the country's growth model. But I don't think Beijing has decided that the game is over, that it will cut down China's property sector to a more reasonable size, and will stop local governments from borrowing as much as they need to achieve GDP growth targets. I hope I am wrong, but I think we probably have another year or two before Beijing is determined to force through a shifting of economic gears, and until then we will see more mini debt crises, perhaps not as spectacular as Evergrande, but painful all the same." End quote. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button. It's really a huge help for a small YouTuber like myself. And if you do think some of this content adds value, it's something that you are looking for, I release one of these just once a week at the end of the week. So maybe consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification, and you'll be notified of this episode when it comes out on the weekend. Just one video a week, so it shouldn't be too much of a pain. And also, I just want to take this opportunity, as always, to say a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for all your support for so long. I really appreciate it. Cheers, guys. China is still dealing with small outbreaks of COVID-19 across the country this week. On Tuesday, the northeastern city of Harbin in Heilongjiang province reported 8 new local COVID cases and a new outbreak unrelated to the outbreak in Fujian last week, which we covered in the last episode. Harbin, with a population of 10 million people, launched citywide nucleic acid testing on Tuesday afternoon, which was completed on Thursday evening. On Wednesday, the entire province, with a population of 37 million people and a land area approximately the size of Spain, declared a provincial-wide state of emergency. Earlier this week, dozens of local cases were also discovered in the southern province of Fujian, part of an outbreak that grew last week and which we covered in that episode. It's becoming increasingly clear that China will face a power shortage this winter in key parts of the country, including the economic powerhouse that is the Pearl River Delta region, and that the state may turn to local coal in response. On Monday, the China Coal Trade and Distribution Association announced that the 3 major state-run coal companies had made pledges regarding the supply and price of coal. China has struggled with a shortage of thermal coal, leading to power rationing in some regions earlier in the year, as imports tightened after Beijing informally banned Australian coal imports last year. This winter, it looks like things could be worse. Chinese financial media outlet Yitai reports that parts of the southern province of Guangdong, China's largest economy in terms of its provinces, have increased power rationing to factories as a severe shortfall in the supply of coal has led to a surge in the cost of electricity generation. However, in a move that looks like the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing, coal factories are also being shut down in places like Shanghai. The quote of the week looks at a statement that reflects rhetoric that has for years been spoken deep in the closet, but is now increasingly spoken with confidence in public, showcasing the true thinking of some of the intelligentsia and policy-making circles in the PRC. Quote, "The rules for the future of the whole world will be decided by us. My PhD was in Western philosophy at BYU. And let me tell you, all the ills and problems that human society faces today were brought about by Western civilization. So by definition, they are incapable of fixing those problems. Therefore, as we move towards the great rejuvenation of the Chinese race, towards the center of the global stage, we must not only solve our challenge of standing up and positioning ourselves as a nation in the forest of nations, but also make fundamental transformations and corrections to the global landscape that has been dominated by the West for centuries." End quote. While living in Beijing, I would hear this sort of language often from academics and low to mid-ranking officials, but very rarely see it in official pronouncements. This sort of leads on to the next story to some extent. The Anglo-Franco drama surrounding the AUKUS agreements to provide Australia with nuclear propulsion submarine technology continues into this week. Beijing is, of course, very unhappy with the news of this announcement between Australia, the UK, and the US, but they also must be thrilled at the same time to see the loud reaction of the French and any destabilization it could cause to the broader US-EU relationship and their coordination on general China policy. Many of the criticisms that have been made by French officials in recent days have been reprinted in state media in the mainland, and of course the regular boilerplate language has been seen in the state media too this week. Quote, "China on Wednesday expressed grave concern over the cooperation between the United States, the UK, and Australia on nuclear submarines, stating that it deliberately escalates regional tensions, provokes an arms race, threatens regional peace and stability, and undermines international nuclear non-proliferation efforts." End quote. The new PRC ambassador to the United States used more provocative language, framing current friction in racial terms rather than cultural, civilizational, or geopolitical. He expressed on Twitter, quote, "Security affairs of the Asia-Pacific should be jointly decided by people in the region and not be dominated by the Anglo-Saxons." End quote. Some analysts have pointed out that the US under the Biden administration has seen 2 mismanaged foreign policy rollouts in recent months. First was Afghanistan, the second was the French relationship with the announcement of this new relationship between the US, the UK, and Australia, AUKUS. This could be a bad sign or a bad signal for regional allies watching the US and concerned that the US cannot be relied upon to maintain a sound and sustainable China policy. I believe that such concerns are premature at this point, but if the US wants key allies on board for a more robust set of policies vis-a-vis China, it cannot afford too many foreign policy mistakes. And while we're here too, this week Japanese media is reporting that leaders from the US, Japan, Australia, and India will agree to work towards a, quote, safe supply chain for semiconductors, end quote, when they meet for the Quad Summit in Washington. And finally, the PRC has expressed a desire to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, a move that has seen mixed reactions from current signatories of the controversial trade pact, and also challenges the economic role of the US, which pulled out of the trade agreement in the early Trump administration in the region. Quote, as the role of the state becomes all the more prevalent in the Chinese economy, Beijing seems to be moving even further away from the market-based high-standard CPTPP rules. The onus is on the candidate to demonstrate its readiness to adhere to the existing high-standard CPTPP rules, as well as to be prepared to make comprehensive market access commitments. China's application to join the CPTPP is one more data point on why Washington needs to step up its economic engagement in the Indo-Pacific, including on trade, end quote. Many believe that the size of the Chinese state intervention in its own economy would make it ineligible for the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement on Trans-Pacific Partnership. However, extensive exceptions for SOE, state-owned enterprises rules, are also available to some existing members, including Mexico and Vietnam, who maintain a significant state sector. And we should never forget as well how attractive China's domestic market is for many. This week too, on Wednesday, Taiwan, Taipei, officially submitted its application to join the CPTPP2 under the name, quote, the Separate Customs Territory of Taiwan, Chinese Taipei, end quote, a title it uses in the World Trade Organization currently. Kyodo News, a Japanese media outlet, reported that the Japanese foreign minister, quote, welcomed Taiwan's application to join the trade deal, end quote, expressing that Taiwan is, quote, an extremely important partner of Japan, end quote. Beijing, of course, was not impressed with the announcement, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian expressing the same day, quote, we resolutely oppose any country's official exchanges with Taiwan and resolutely oppose the Taiwan region's accession to any official agreements and organizations, end quote. Okay guys, that is this episode of China Update. Thank you so much for watching. Throw your comments below as always. I always appreciate hearing from you guys wherever you are. I hope you're keeping safe and keeping sane. I will see you all next time on China Update.